A Snickers bar from 2014 to 2018 increased in price from 99 cents to $1.68, a 70% increase in price, and it decreased in size from 232 grams to 168 grams, which is a decrease of 28.1%. What's up, and welcome back to the Foodservice Distribution Podcast. This is episode... I sounded a little weird there. The Foodservice Distribution Podcast. That was a motorcycle. I'm your host, David Layton. I have not recorded an episode for about a month, and I apologize. This is actually one that I was working on about a month ago and pumped the brakes on it because I had to pop down to Portland, and if you're watching the video, you can see I got married. I got married to the most amazing woman. I've been with her for about 6 years, and we just decided to make it official. So, took a few weeks off of work, off of the podcast, off of, media and politics and all that fun stuff that I'm not even involved in on a regular basis anyways. And came back and started to think about inflation, deflation, and the topic of today, which is shrinkflation. So, without further ado, I will introduce today's episode, FDP27, the hidden implications of shrinkflation. So, what is shrinkflation? To back up a little bit, there's two terms that will probably not impact the day-to-day of your business, whether you're a restaurant, a food service distributor, a distributor of any kind, or I would say even a business owner of any kind. These two things that don't affect the day-to-day, but do affect the overall profitability of a business over its lifetime, significantly more than a lot of other variables, is inflation and shrinkflation. Now, normally, you would hear inflation coupled with deflation when somebody's talking about two flations, but this is not an economics podcast. This is something that is... it's turning into one, isn't it? This is not an economics podcast. It's more of a help to business owners, to restaurants, to anybody who works in restaurants, trying to understand how to buy things better, how to, maybe some of this will help to improve your business, and understanding a lot of the, I'll call it macro forces on your business is very helpful in making day-to-day decisions. So, got to zoom out to see it has a huge impact on the overall health over a long period of time, but then you can get real granular and pick a product up and make sure that you are getting the right product, that it's the best deal and highest form of ingredients compared to other products. So let me back up a little bit. I just got a little too far ahead, but let's start with this. In order to define what shrinkflation is and how it impacts your business, first I would need to define inflation. And basically, inflation is a number goes up, right? Or quantity goes up or something like that. But there are several different versions of inflation. And the way that I try to organize it in my mind is just thinking of these three main, which is price inflation, asset inflation, and monetary inflation. So a price inflation is just when the cost of goods or services goes up. An asset inflation would be the cost of assets like real estate or assets like stocks, equities, something like that goes up in dollar value and currency value. Monetary inflation is when the supply of a currency within a system increases. So monetary inflation would be I'll give an example of all three here. Price inflation is my coffee cost $2 10 years ago, now it costs $3. It's price inflation. Asset inflation, a house is worth $150,000 in the 90s, and this year it's worth $500,000. That's asset inflation. If you look at monetary inflation, that's a good example is you may have heard it in a podcast or on the news. The Federal Reserve balance sheet was around $4.1 trillion in February before COVID. And as a part of the stimulus, the money printing, the Fed balance sheet is now around $7 trillion. So that's monetary inflation. There were $4.1 trillion on a balance sheet. They created money, and now there's $7 trillion monetary inflation. So now that you have that, what is shrinkflation? Basic definition of shrinkflation is when a product gets smaller, but the price does not get smaller, or price doesn't get lower. I pulled an official Collins Dictionary definition, so we could get the official definition. Shrinkflation, a reduction in the size of an item of packaged food, such as a chocolate bar, while the price remains the same. So, same thing. A product gets smaller, the price does not get lower. You might be asking, does this have a major impact? Does it have an impact on the products that I'm buying? What products does it have? What products are affected the most, and so on. So, of course, I always try to reference something that I can point to that's tangible, that has some numbers or some data behind it. And there's a study that I found, published in 2019 from the BBC, which is the British Broadcasting Corporation, or company. They're essentially a media outlet. They have journalists that do this investigative journalism, and what they did is they collected portion and pricing data from a set of the world's most popular chocolate bars and candy bars, and they looked at the change in weight in grams and what the price was between 2014 and 2018. A couple of the findings from this I cherry picked a few of the data points to just kind of take a high level look at it. Two examples here. A Snickers bar in 2014 was 99 cents, and it weighed 232 grams. In 2018, a Snickers bar cost $1.68, which is a 70% increase in price, and it weighed 167 grams, which is a 28% reduction in size. Okay, so I'll say that again, because that's kind of crazy. A Snickers bar from 2014 to 2018 increased in price from 99 cents to $1.68, a 70% increase in price, and it decreased in size from 232 grams to 168 grams, which is a decrease of 28.1%. That's massive. That's when I first saw this, I was completely shocked, because you see the Snickers, you hear about things getting smaller. You may have noticed that your tuna went from 6 ounces to 5.5, or canned tomato. You start to notice that some of this stuff might be getting smaller over time, but a 70% increase in price and a 28% decrease in size in a 4-year period, that's wild. Second example, another one that's not as extreme, the Toblerone. A Toblerone, so that's the chocolate candy bar with the little peaks on it, went from $1.17 to $1.48, which is a 27% increase in price. And in size, it went from 200 grams to 150 grams. So that's a full 25% decrease in size. So increase 27% in price, decrease 25% in size. Not as extreme, but still, that one's wild. One thing to note here, that in 2016, so halfway through that process, I thought this was really fascinating. This is an intentional, obviously, this is a deliberate move by manufacturers, candy manufacturers, producers of all types, to make this change so that the consumer feels like they're still getting relatively the same value year over year. So 2 years into this study, in 2016, Toblerone actually, they took a step back and they went through a design change process to the packaging. So they moved the peaks on the packaging 10%, or decreased the space between them by 10%. And so it's just to know what goes into this. You have to change. You have to reformulate the product. A lot of the time, these guys will take ingredients that are a little bit less expensive too, and mix it in with the old ingredients, so that you're getting a little bit worse quality of ingredients as well. But then you go through the whole process of changing the packaging, and if the packaging needs to be a different size, then you're changing the some of the pieces to the manufacturing equipment that is going to produce a smaller package. So the thought process behind it and the upfront investment of making changes like this is substantial. And there's a group of people talking in a room discussing all of these changes before it happens. It doesn't just happen. So something to think about. That's pretty wild. Not to say that anybody is doing anything intentionally harmful or wrong when they do this. One of the main points that I try to get across more towards the end of this, is that this is how the incentives are aligned if you're in a inflationary environment. So more on that later. I don't think anybody's doing any intentional, harmful, malicious type activity here by decreasing the volumes. Changing the ingredients, that's another story, but stick with me here. Okay. So I'll put links to that study also if somebody wants to go through it. There's a lot of other examples and a lot of great information. So I'll put a link in the show notes to the bbc.com article or report and their findings. Something to think about in this, that while I was writing this, while I was typing this up and doing my research, I started to think about all of the different components that go into the price of an item. So if you were to take this information, reach out to the manufacturer of a Toblerone or a Snickers or Lay's or whoever, and just ask them why the pricing to serving ratio had changed so much, more than likely they would say that the generic answer would be that it's the raw materials. The peanuts, the chocolate, the dairy, all that stuff. The pricing's changing, the price is going up, and we had to make an adjustment. We had to make a slight increase to the price, and we had to make a slight decrease to the... So they will explain it. Nobody's trying to hide it, but that's usually the blanket reason for why price increases occur. But there's a lot of other components that go into the price discovery of an item, or just how a product or service finds its price in the market when a consumer goes and buys it. And some of those things, this is not a complete list. This is just the stuff that I was thinking over. So first, yes, raw materials. That's the price of taking the Snickers bar as an example would be the price of cocoa, the price of peanuts, of sugar, of caramel, of dairy. I'm sure there's some other components there, but these are all commodities. So commodities, the price fluctuates year round, right? So commodities markets are always going up and down. People make a living off of trading commodities because the price is always fluctuating. It's volatile, and if you have something that's volatile, there's a lot of opportunity for traders and stuff like that. But that's neither here nor there. So what affects the price of commodities? Of each of these 5 items that I just listed, they're all commodities. Those are affected by different things, like weather and the regions that they're grown in, the yield of that crop or of that product. So whether or not it was a full yield of what they were expecting, or if some sort of weather or flooding or bugs or infestation, something came and wiped out some of the crop, that plays into the overall end price of whatever they were able to pull out of the ground. Labor costs go into that. So whether or not there's a mandatory federal or statewide regional increase to labor or minimum wage that you would need to pay. Unforeseen costs like new machinery. Again, something that's the powers to be would contribute to this, which is tax increases, something of that nature. Competition. You get in a little bit further, you get into inflation, and these are just what impacts commodity pricing. Inflation, currency exchange rate if you are going to import products. So you have to think that's another market that just how commodity pricing goes up and down, and it's always it's always interacting with other commodities in one way or another. The price of the price of global currencies relative to your local currency is always changing too. That's the foreign exchange market, and there's so many different currencies around the world that if you're importing products from another country, you are usually, hopefully, paying those invoices in your own currency. But if you're paying in the foreign currency, you have to do an exchange, and that plays into the overall cost to you, the landed cost of that product or that commodity. So a lot of things to consider there, a lot of variables that need to be lined up in order for you as the consumer to pay a steady price. So that's a lot of the times why people have buffers built in to mitigate the loss on unforeseen things, like say a sugar crop gets completely wiped out, and sugar is the one thing that the price spikes. Everything else stays relatively flat. Hopefully, you have a 5% buffer to eat the increase of the sugar. That was said. That was a completely broken sentence. I apologize for that, but you get what I'm saying. Next thing we're not done yet. Next thing that affects the end price, the consumer price that they pay for a product, would be employee wages, right? So at every production facility, every manufacturer, every farm has employees, and there might be changes to wages. Additionally, state or federally mandated changes to benefits, contributions to retirement funds, healthcare, etc. So those types of things are factored into the overall health of a business and sometimes are extended into the price of their products. That would work in the same way. I know you're thinking it could be disconnected, but it would work in the same way if a farmer gets to a certain size and scale that he has 100 employees, and he offers up competitive wages or non-competitive wages, and the state comes in and says you need to increase your, we increased minimum wages so that you have to pay more for your employees. That's going to carry out through the entire process and end up, there will be most likely a increase to the end product. If it's just, a farmer that's farming peanuts, in this example, then peanut price will increase slightly. Maybe not the best example because peanuts are such a massive market, but wages in an organization can reflect in the end price of that product that they're selling. So said easily. Next thing is the transportation of those products. So the transportation would again be the labor, the equipment, the truck, all of that stuff. And another commodity that plays into that would be the price of oil or the price of fuel for that truck to get from A to B. So if the cost of oil is higher, the freight cost is higher for that load, and the product per unit is going to be higher as well. The next thing, and I really don't want to jump too far into this, I already kind of talked about it at the beginning, but a major component over time, and the inverse of this is what inflation is, a major component to the overall price. So we're still talking about how a product finds its price, is the decreasing of the purchasing power of the dollar or of any currency. So it'd be the devaluation of the dollar. And if you haven't looked into this before, you might be thinking, David, that's a really weird hole to go down when we're talking about just how products find their price. But it's something that you should be informed about and aware of, that over time, our dollars, every dollar in your pocket, as more are added to the system, like pre-COVID. Remember, there's $4.1 trillion on the Fed's balance sheet. Now there's $8 trillion or $7 trillion. As more dollars are created, the purchasing power, or what each individual dollar can buy, is decreased. And since the dollar was born in 1913, it's lost over 99% of its purchasing power. So said differently, a dollar today buys 1% of what it bought in 1913, or just a little over 100 years ago. So pretty wild to think about. My whole point of bringing that up is that having a solid foundation, well, without getting too far into it, if you look at money, any sort of money is 50% of every transaction, okay? That's no matter what currency, even if you're bartering, you're using something you're bartering as some form of money. So money is 50% of every transaction on the planet. If you have a money that is getting devalued and debased over time, we can call it a currency that is getting debased and devalued over time, that is going to naturally cause some sort of price inflation to items because the dollars are worth less, so the amount of dollars it takes to buy the same amount of stuff increases. So devaluation of the dollar absolutely plays a role in how items find their price, their end price. Another point, and this is moving on. Don't worry, I am moving on now. Another point on shrinkflation, though. Shrinkflation is a natural response. I said again, it's not. I don't think anybody's doing some intentional wrongdoing here. It's a natural response from businesses to keep products affordable in an inflationary environment. So instead of just raising prices all the time, they want to pull back on the amount of product that they're selling or providing so that it doesn't appear that the level of inflation or price inflation is as high as it would be otherwise. Something that I always like to think about that's in that same line of thinking is that I guess it's something that I always like to say, that if you show me the incentives, I'll be able to predict what happens next. Okay, so if you're incentivized to, provide, or if you're incentivized to, in this environment, inflationary environment, to keep the price of a product the same, I would guarantee that the product is going to get smaller or the ingredients are going to change. I'll give you my take at the end of this on what I would do or what I would recommend in that type of situation. If you know that you're going to need to raise prices or you're going to have to change products, we'll get there. But that's something that I'll always like to think about when I'm trying to predict what's going to happen next in any scenario. You show me the incentives and I'll predict what will happen next. Okay? So here's the fun part. If you're not already having fun yet, I wanted to share a story. I'm actually going to read from a story, and it's from a passage, an author that I just discovered recently. He writes a lot of shorter stories. He's on Medium. He talks a lot about macroeconomics and history, monetary history. I thought it would be perfect to share this because inflation, deflation, shrinkflation, all this stuff it ties directly to, surprisingly, monetary history and the history of goods and services, free markets, price discovery, that type of thing. So his name is Robert Breedlove. He wrote an article, or he wrote a piece. I'll put it in the show notes also. It's worth reading the entire thing through. It's fascinating. The piece is called Masters and Slaves of Money. And this is a short story that he was calling the winemaker's dilemma. So here's the piece, and then I'll explain kind of my thoughts on it after. Honest money encourages righteous action, and dishonest money induces moral hazard. To comprehend money's impact on morality, consider the hypothetical case of a winemaker living in a centrally banked economy. He knows that his central bank recently doubled the money supply by printing trillions of dollars to save the economy, and is now faced with three options. 1. Continue selling his wine for $20, knowing that the value of each dollar has declined 50% due to inflation. 2. Water down his wine or use cheaper ingredients, thereby decreasing the production cost and quality of his wine, but continuing to sell it for $20. Or 3. Double the selling price of his wine to $40 to get the same value for his wine denominated in post-inflation dollars. Okay, so those are the three options. If the winemaker chooses the first option, he'll incur a 50% loss. If he decides to water down his wine, he defrauds his customers by selling them an inferior product. If he doubles his price to maintain quality, he risks losing customers to less honest competitors who are willing to compromise on quality. Since diluting wine with water is difficult to detect for non-connoisseurs and offers an immediate financial gain, all winemakers face strong incentives to defraud their customers when inflation strikes, a cause of wine scandals. He actually links here to a lot of instances over the past few decades of people watering down their wine and using inferior products, marking up price on inferior products, all that kind of stuff. So I'll put a link to that. I'll put a link to the actual article in here. All right, back to the piece. In a similar vein, monetary inflation incentivizes sellers across all industries to deceive their customers. Inflation imposes the temptation of larceny onto sellers' hearts, forcing them to weigh financial well-being against moral integrity. Pretty cool, right? Really, really good piece if you read the entire thing. And his argument is for basically just bringing to light the effects of inflation on society, not even modern society, but for the past 10,000 years that we've been using different types of currencies intermittently with gold and sound money, hard money, that type of thing. We have been in this position before where we continue increasing the money supply. But again, don't want to get too sidetracked. I always do that going down the monetary history and economics channel. So we'll pull it back a little bit. The whole point of that is that this winemaker, just like any restaurant owner or business owner, anybody who's selling a service or selling a product, is up against, what the winemaker is up against, is realizing that the cost of his product, by down one way or another, whether it's the dollar being debased or devalued, or just the price of the raw materials going up, the cost of the raw materials and the stuff that he is paying for is increasing substantially. So he's faced with, does he take a 50% hit? So continue selling for $20 and take a 50% hit on your profit margin? Do you water down your wine with cheaper ingredients or just with water and decrease the production cost? And that's going to reduce the quality, but he continues selling for $20. And that option right there is what a lot of his competitors are going to opt towards. They're going to use cheaper ingredients, just like the manufacturers of the candy bars. They're going to try and find cheaper ingredients. They're going to sell a little bit less. They're going to put some fillers in it. Or do you double the price to $40? Does he double the price of his wine and just hope that his customers, that your customers, my customers, will see the value in this product or this service that is as good as it always has been, but is more expensive because of the outside forces that are acting on it? It's a hard question. A lot of people try to meet somewhere in the middle, and here's my personal thought on it, for what it's worth. I would take the price increase. I would increase the price of my goods and services if I had to pick one or the other. And the reason why, no matter what the surrounding circumstances are, so you have things like inflation, deflation, product shrinkflation, taxes, labor, anything else, I would never want to compromise the quality of my product or the quality of my service. So if customers know, right? Customers know just how you and I might, or anybody listening to this might inherently know that there is something going on that you can't quite put your finger on with inequality in the two-party political system, with prices going up, with there's some shortages on products, there's something going on that doesn't feel right. So if you were to compromise the quality of your product by changing out some ingredients, your customers probably wouldn't take a bite of your pizza and say, this sauce has been cut with some other less expensive sauce. But they would know. They would inherently know that something is a little bit off. Would that make them decide to go somewhere else or choose a competitor over you? Probably not. But if you made too many of those changes and people just kind of felt like the service or the quality of the product is off, is different, is worse than it used to be, but the price is the same, you might lose a couple of customers through that. It's important to say everyone has to make their own decision. And don't listen to me just because I'm talking into a microphone. You have to weigh the outcome of potential choices that you're making. But my personal choice would be to not compromise the quality. And if you have to take a increase, you have to pass that increase on in some way, then that's probably the route that I would go. So that's where I'm going to leave it. An interesting one today. I hope it was worth the 3.5 week wait. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to these, doing them at least once a week, because I learn a lot researching this stuff, reading these materials, combining it into bullet points, and going through the process of recording these. I've learned a lot from the people that I've connected with through this. I was very surprised when I went away. I came back and I checked. I figured that everybody would have stopped listening, and I gained some viewers, mostly some listeners. I gained some listeners through Spotify and Apple and all that, and that means a lot. That means that this people are sharing it. People are, I don't think, reviewing it yet. If you have the time, that's a good call to action. If you have the time, I would love to have a review. Go into whatever app you're listening to and rate this however you see fit. If it was high quality content and you enjoyed this, 5 stars would mean so much. All right, I'm going to wrap up there. Thank you so much for making it this far. Thank you for listening. As always, feel free to reach out. Find me on Twitter at FoodservicePod. Send me an email, foodservicepod@protonmail.com. Go check out my sponsor, Anchor. I probably already ran a sponsorship commercial at some point through this, so I don't need to tell you about them again. But Anchor.fm, go find them there. And as always, get outside. Weather's not great here, but I'm still going to go outside. I'm going to click end, and I'm going to pop outside, and I don't know, go run a couple laps. Either way, have an awesome evening. Have an awesome rest of your week. Thanks for listening. Take care.